Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 1 of Alice in Borderland. Obviously, I'm going to be jumping straight into spoilers, so if you have not seen all of Alice in Borderland, do not listen to this because I will spoil a lot of stuff, so you have been warned. So jumping into it, overall, what did I think about this season? I thought it was great. This is also coming from someone, and I've talked about this before. I didn't realize this was a manga, so I've never read the manga because I only just found out it was a manga earlier this month when I did my watch list. But regardless, so this is my first experiences with the story, what I'm trying to say, and I enjoyed it. I can tell with just the nature of this series, this is going to be one of those depressing series you're like, oh God, because it's one of those series where like anyone can go at any time. Obviously, you know, we'll jump into it, but it's like, it's just one of those, it's going to be one of those heartbreaking series that you're just like, oh God, you're almost afraid to keep watching because it's like, well, you want to understand the mystery and stuff like that, but you're wondering like, who's going to get it next? Like, you know, what's the next twisted game that's in the way? Like, because when I saw this initially, what immediately came to my mind, and I think I talked about it, it was a combination of Saul and Danganronpa. There was something else I was making comparison to, and I'm blanking on what it was, but definitely like there was elements of like I was like there's certain elements of this that I'm like are very Danganronpa-esque, but there's definitely like this kind of Saul element to it as well. Oh, the world ends with you is kind of where like how there's the whole game element to it. It kind of that's what the other thing was, but regardless, jumping into it, obviously we get introduced to our initial trio. Arisu, Karube, and Chota. I will also let you know ahead of time, I'm going to butcher a lot of names just because I'm terrible with names, especially like I'm sure I'm just like in my head I can phonetically see how you probably say someone's name, but I'm sure I'm going to butcher the actual pronunciation of a lot of names, so do cut me some slack on that part, so I do apologize. But it was interesting, obviously getting introduced to them, and obviously it's like, oh, they were futzing around, because we got introduced to like, Arisu, like, obviously kind of being, like, I guess the quote-unquote loser of his family. His brother's the more successful one. All he does is play video games and stuff like that. So his brother looks down on him like, oh, like, things were better when mom was around or something like that. So it's almost like trying to guilt him. Then his dad was pissed at him. Then, Karube, it's like, oh yeah, like turns out like he works at a bar, but he gets fired because he knocks his boss out because he's actually cheating on his boss, she's cheating with his boss's girlfriend or wife, significant other, whatever the case may be. And then you also have Chota, who has a complicated thing. Like we meet the whole you get introduced to the whole situation with his mom, and then you're kind of like, what is that all about? She's asking for money and stuff like that, and she's just kind of like, oh yeah, the evil in the world needs to be purified. You're like, what's that all about? Obviously they're meeting up. It's just like, yeah, life's kind of but it's like, hey, we had this fun time, we can get together. Obviously shenanigans ensue, and they go in the bathroom, and then when they come out, everyone had disappeared. What I thought was so interesting about those circumstances, though, before, like, I think the lights had gone out first, and then someone knocked at the door, and you're like, well, I guess that was meant to be the point that was supposed to be, like, the instigation for potentially joining them into the game, but, it's, once that happens, the show hits the ground running, in my personal opinion. Once again, you can see some very, like, Saw-esque, like I said, like, traps and games mixed into this and stuff like that. But, and I like, because obviously, Arisu having, like, the mind that he does because of the games he plays and stuff. Like, I think it's also, like, he is very smart in his own right. Granted, he spends so much time playing puzzle games, so him being part of this murder game is actually kind of perfect for him. Because obviously it was that whole situation, you picked the wrong door. And even I was like, okay, there's got to be some logic to this particular thing. But then it's like, it's like, how do you know whether to go to the live door or die door? And then for Karube to hit him, but then it jogs Arisu's mind of like, wait, I saw that car. That car had these measurements. Your boy went hard, breaking everything down. Like, okay, the building's only this big, and if we judge that this room is about this length, that means at most this building can only house 9 rooms. So that means, considering the dimensions of the building, I'm like, dude, I was like, oh shit, I didn't know you were gonna go nuts like this. And he was figuring it out. And then I like the trick where it's like, because sadly that first girl died because Saori, which I don't know how to properly When I see her name, I want to say Sayori, but I think it is like Saori is how you properly pronounce it. Once again, I'm probably going to butcher a lot of stuff. When she was just kind of like telling someone to pick a door, and it was like, does she know something? And it's like, oh, well, she knew that she'd rather take a gamble on like someone else is using their lives. And obviously that turned into a whole debate between everyone being like, no, you go. It's like, no, like, Arisu is going to do it, but then he gets scared, understandably, because like, nobody wants to die. Like, there's going to be that instinct in your body to look out, for self-preservation. Regardless, the point I was making was I thought it was so dope where it's like they go back through the video because Chota was recording everything, and he's like, look at this room. There's no door when she went into the room. With the dimensions of the room, if there was a door, considering like we know that this door would go to the room where she died, but it's like there's no doors, so it's like, wait, there must be another room right here. I was like, oh my god, I was like, that's so sick. And luckily they got out of the granted. Chota got really messed up. But and then we find out, like, obviously, like, at first when they introduced the visas, I was like, oh, do you get like at first I was immediately like, oh, it's a buffer window. You have 3 days before you have to do like the next game or something, which is technically true. But it's more so, it's not like, because I thought like maybe it's like, oh, that means you have 3 days off before you have to participate in the next game. It's like, well, technically it's true, but it's more so like you have until your time runs out, and if it runs out, you die. Because we got introduced to like the lasers and stuff like that, and it's like, oh, I didn't know that's how we're handling this. Literally lasers from the sky, pew, and straight up kill you one shot till you're like, okay, interesting. That one dude they ran into ended up killing himself because he was just like, it's just like no matter how many games you win, there's just no beating this, because and for him, he was on his last day of his visa at that point in time. So like a really interesting like game to get introduced to the series on, but also kind of understand rules, because the next one introduced like understanding like what the cards represent, and I thought that was so pretty dope to kind of understand the game. Clubs meaning team games, diamonds meaning battle of wits, and hearts being games of betrayal. So that was an interesting introduction. At the same, it's interesting while that's all happening, like literally there's the whole Chota and Saori thing, because we see that she's kind of like she's willing to try and take any opportunity, sacrifice whoever she needs to, because obviously like Karube kind of throws it in her face about like how she was so quick to throw people under the bus, but it's like, if you want to survive this, you have to. Because at first she talks about the fact is that the reason, because she lies about where she was when people disappeared. She was sleeping with her boss, but we kind of find out like that was her only way to kind of make her way through. She had to like, sadly bang her boss. She's like, I didn't like him, but it's like she needed to do that to progress further in her career. So, but like the way they started warping her story was kind of like, I need to get back to the original world, because the fact is that I was there. I worked so hard just to have everything I worked so hard for taken from me, in that moment when basically everyone disappears. Because they immediately start throwing out theories about, what's going on here, because it's like, it's like, why did all the power go out? It's like, was it like a gigantic, like electro, like an EMP? Was it like a giant EMP? But then it's like, if that's the case, why do these phones still work? Because obviously, Chota ends up pointing out it's like basically like the IC chips inside of the electronic devices, whether it be cars or anything, that specific chips, which is in most, I think, electronics, means that they won't work. But anything that's older that don't have them will be fine. Like obviously like radios and certain older radios and stuff like that. So it's about trying to figure out this whole thing, because obviously Arsu is also the one who comes up with the thing of like, oh, there must be a game master as well, someone who concocted all this, and if we can find them, maybe we can end all this, kind of getting to those thoughts early. The game of tag, which was in episode 2, was so interesting, because like obviously they're like, well, if we play more games, we'll be able to not only boost our visas, but also allow us to get a better understanding of how everything works. That was a crazy, because I didn't know what to expect when they turned it to tag. I was like, okay. I was like, was one of them going to be it? But it was like the tagger was someone else, and I was like, okay. And then we never got to look at the taggers at first, and I was like, what's this? Is it going to be an animal or something? I didn't expect it to be a shooter. I was like, whoa, one like in a horse mask and everything. I was like, what the hell is that? That situation was brutal. But then you had like, obviously we didn't know his name at the time, and I'm going to butcher his name. Chishia, we got interested in him. What was interesting though was like he was at the top. He was on the 7th floor, and he literally stayed there like 90% of the game. You know, because obviously like everyone else was on the lower levels. Because he was like, yeah, this is going to be a good spot. I guess for him, he made sure to stay on the higher place because he figured like I guess he had enough experience with the games where he's like, well, if the tagger's going to be anywhere, it's going to be on the lower levels, and there's everyone else scattered amongst the lower levels. So because the home dude never actually made it to floor 7 because he was too busy killing up and going after other people on the like other 5 or 6 floors, you know. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Home dude who was like, oh, I've been through like 5 or so games. I think that was kind of a nice way to show you too, like, oh, just because you've been through a couple games don't mean jack shit. Like, obviously, like, the newbie ended up surviving because obviously Arizu went out of his way to kind of help him. I mean, obviously he went out of his way to kind of help make sure like everyone else that survived. But it was mainly because like, you know, even that dude who had experience playing other games, even he got killed at the end. Because, I mean, with the unpredictability of these games, it's like just because you survive these other games doesn't mean you're going to survive this one, you know? Because, you know, it was a situation that was kind of stacked against you. Because it's like, oh, you got to find a safe room. And it's like, well, what's the safe room? You have literally 7 floors of rooms to check, you know? So I thought that was how that was all constructed. Because we also got, at the end of episode 1, we got introduced to Usagi, and kind of like, you know, we learned a little bit about her. Like, obviously, she's got experience in climbing because of her dad, which that was a whole sad backstory to find out. Like, we don't know if her dad is dead. It's hinted that, you know, I wondered, did she ever find out who it was that ran that story, or who started the rumor that her dad, his accomplishment on soloing a certain mountain without an oxygen or whatever, it's like, oh, he did it with oxygen, like his acclaim isn't as good. So basically, you know, because it seems for him and, you know, his daughter, it was more so like the mountains are what kind of spoke to them. It's where they can be themselves without being judged by people. Like they were probably more in tune with the mountains than they were with other people, you know, and he left and never came back, you know, and especially how that like folds into the story, in many different regards. Like, I like how this story was constructed in a way that it's just, you know what's good, it's like Saul, it's like Danganronpa. Like I said, like, especially like Danganronpa, you'd be like, oh, so-and-so is super safe. It's like, no, they're not, you know, because no one's a guarantee in like a Danganronpa game, you know? So that's what I kind of felt like is very reminiscent. And it's like, no one's safe. Like, I'm going to be blunt with you. I cried, what was that, episode 3? When, Karube, Chota, and Sori ended up dying. I was fighting back the tears, man. I was like, no, especially when he was like, okay, you know, no, you guys deserve to live more than I do, because he realized, for him, it's like, you know, obviously his family kind of looked down upon him, but he always had his friends. They were so important to him. They kept him going. And it's like, you guys, your lives matter more than mine, so I'm going to save you. And each one of them sacrificed themselves because they realized, like, you know, in particular, Chota, he didn't want things to turn out that way. He didn't want to, like, turn against his friend. Because I thought that was so interesting, because I thought we were going to have a super hard swerve when it came to Chota's character, just because we had Sari kind of, like, being like, oh, yeah, like, you're in no condition to play the next game. Like, your friends, like, you know, the strong like to have the weak to follow them. Like, she was skewing him towards. Granted, it was in her nature to kind of, I don't want to say nature, but it was just, like, her need to, like, survive. And obviously that'd be a conversation that she had with, Arisu about, you know, the whole how far are you willing to go to survive. Obviously the second challenge kind of proved a lot of that too, like how much like other people, and that, like, there's just so much to go over that I'm all over the place, so I do apologize. I liked, you know, his friends making a sacrifice to him, especially because it was like it was a heart game, so it was meant to turn them against each other. But then, like, at the end, them making a sacrifice, and even at the end, sorry, like, she wasn't too upset, because I think for her, she was astounded by what they were willing to do. Like, despite everything, you were going to, like, she kind of assumed the worst in people, that when the time came, people would do whatever it takes for their own self-survival, but for them to be doing this for their friend, you know? And so Saori kind of hugs Chota, and they hug each other. And, you know, Kabuto, I'd say Kabuto, Karube is there saying, like, you know, thank you, and dying right in front of Arisu. And I like I said, I hold back the tear. I was like, man, that was heartbreaking. Because I was thinking like, all right, when the time comes, he's gonna find a way to save everybody, and it's like he wasn't able to. I was like, fuck, dude. That's the once again, you thought even if they died, you would have expected, it'd be later on, not episode 3. Yes, it's 8 episodes, but you still would have expected maybe like near the season finale, not like episode 3. We got introduced to these characters. We're learning a little bit. I'm like, we learned, Karube went back to that bar to get the engagement ring because his boss's lady. It's like he was going to propose to her, but then he was thinking about what she's saying, like, you're such a kind person, like obviously being their first friends and stuff like that. And that moment, it made him go, because I think the whole conversation, because we also learned about Chota too. Like, see what I mean? We learned about their backstory and they died like that regardless. It's like giving us a little insight to their backstory didn't mean like, you're going to be sticking around for us to learn even more about you. Because we learned more about Chota's mom's situation. It seemed like whether it was a church or a cult, she would pay into it, and it seemed like, obviously, it kind of seems like Chota like saw his mom kind of undressing, so I'm assuming like the head of that group or whatever she was having sex with. So I think that's why he kind of resents his mom a little bit, like in that regard, because she was the one that believed he didn't really until all this ended up happening. It's sad too because like obviously they were enjoying it at first. So it's like, hey, we're just the only ones, no responsibilities, we can do whatever we want. And then Karube being like, Chota, that means that you're going to die. Basically, you're going to live the rest of your life as a virgin. He was like, haha, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. But that was just heartbreaking, and obviously it broke Arisu, him running across Usagi. At first she was like, well, if you're not going to live, who cares? But then she went back to him because when she saw him, it reminded her of like when her dad disappeared, when it was all the stuff saying like, maybe he potentially went into the mountains and died and killed himself out of shame. And she was in that state too, because obviously for Arisu, it's like his brain is telling him like, I want to die and be reunited with my friends because it's the only way I can make up to them. I can apologize, but it's like his body's still hungry. So despite how he's thinking in his mind, his body still wants to live, and like the conflict with that, which obviously Asagi's like, I was in that state too, So it's about, you were given this chance, so you need, basically leading to you were given a chance, so you need to make it count. The situation with the bus, that was the biggest middle finger. That sucks. It's like, because obviously it's like, okay, we're getting to know these characters. One, it's like, yeah, you got to get back to your wife. The other, one stay behind because his leg was hurt. He didn't want to hold anyone back. And it turns out the bus was the goal the entire time. It's like, that sucks. It's like, because the game was intentionally misleading, because it's like it made you think you had to get a certain distance away within a certain amount of time, like because they had like a good chunk of time. It's like you need to get away in a time frame, and it's like cover a certain distance. But it's like no, they knew that it would mislead people. That was the point of the game, just to see if anyone it was designed to mislead you like that. So. Home dude got killed by the panther, but I think he ended up, what we saw, we didn't get really look at, but it seems like he killed a panther in the process. It killed him, but he killed it as well. Home dude who's, was it Yamane, who was trying to get back to his wife, got swept up in the water, and it's sad. Like, home dude that stayed behind, it's like, maybe if I'll meet you guys again. We never saw him the rest of the season, but I'm assuming, like, they're going to cross paths with him. Hopefully, that's the thing. Like, someone going off, you never know whether it's a thing of, they went off and you won't see that character again. It's a little hope of, like, hey, maybe we will, but, obviously, like, there's also that message, Karube had gotten, from that radio about the, finding the beach and stuff like that. I should also note, I thought I should circle back to that because I thought that was a really interesting development, was when Aguni was like, hey, he was talking to Karube, it's like, we are going to go after the taggers, you, Arisu, go find the safe room, and like just how that, I wasn't expecting them to go into offensive like that. That was pretty dope. That was just an interesting development I wasn't expecting. I mean, it's like a horror movie where it's like, in the horror movie, you get to that point where, like, obviously you're going up again, you go face to face with the killer. Sometimes it happens at different points in a movie and stuff like. It just kind of reminded me of that. And now, and I like too, because obviously with what happens in the later parts of the season, it makes a lot of that earlier stuff. Obviously, because there was the radio about the beach and stuff like that. When he turns around, Aguni is, Aguni is already gone. So it's like, what's that about? Like I said, I would have never thought that Chishiya and which to me, I wonder is he supposed like because obviously there's a bit of a Alice in Wonderland like motif, I guess might be the word to it. Aspect to this show. So I'm wondering if Chishiya, once again, I'm butchering his name. He kind of. Do you think that's supposed to be kind of like a wink and nod to him being like the Cheshire Cat? That's what I was wondering because Arisu's gamer name I think was Alice, so I think that's also where that kind of comes from. Kami, to be fair, he is kind of supposed to be kind of the representative of Alice, But regardless, like the whole introduction of the beach, finding out like circle like especially when they went back to the mystery of like, all right, you saw Aguni and the guy he sacrificed, they had that thing on their wrist, and it's like, what's that about? And we find out they're all part of the same group. I was like, oh, so there's like a large scale group operating these games. I mean, not just like the masterminds of the games, but the large group of people who are playing this game, and it turns out they're connected to the beach. They're working under the Hatter, which immediately I was like, oh, like he's supposed to be the Mad Hatter just because of but obviously we ended up finding out much later on. It's like, oh, he was literally a Hatter. He took over the business, I guess, because his dad he said that was his dad's dying wish, which makes me, I think that's interesting because that makes him the Mad Hatter, and I think that makes Aguni, the rabbit from Alice in Wonderland, not the white rabbit with the clock, but the hair is what I think I think that's his name, right? I'm butchering that. I'm so sorry. The Mad Hatter and his pal with the tea parties. Like, I wonder is that supposed to be like Aguni's supposed to be like the representation of that. But obviously it's like they're this large scale organization being like, or this large scale group, because basically they've come up with the thing of like, oh, we heard this and that from someone that basically if you collect all of the cards that one person can get out. I was like, that's so interesting because there's a total of 52 cards. They've gotten a large chunk of them, but obviously there were some that were missing. We get introduced to so many other people. Obviously, like I said, Chishiya, I'm butchering his name, Kuina, and like I said, Hatter. Actually, there's a lot of those like executive characters, and we never actually found out what happened to them. I'm assuming they're dead. There's just like I don't remember them ever explicitly dying, but maybe they did off screen or something. I don't know. Because there's but maybe that's kind of implying some other stuff. Now that I'm thinking about it, with stuff at the end, we'll circle back to it. But and having solved that whole light switch situation ahead of time, and was using it as a test for Arisu, and luckily he figured it out. And she was kind of impressed, and it's like, hey, and at first too, I was also and I'm glad they also explained that thing about Kuina, like why she was like chewing on stuff. It's like, oh, she decided to stop smoking because it's like I have to be the one to take care of my mom, and if I want to survive these games, I need to be in good health. So no smoking because I need stamina for these games because you never know what they're gonna demand of you. But I thought that was so interesting, like how that was handled, especially because it's like, oh, like this place, it's supposed to be almost like a sanctuary of paradise, especially because like Arisu and Usagi are looking around like they're partying it up like we aren't in a very fucked up situation, but it's like they're living it up and partying, so it's a bit of a paradise. But then like also there's the dual side to it because Aguni and the militias, they're kind of at war a little bit with Hatter and his people, so there's a lot of tension going on in that part. There was also that story Hatter told I thought was kind of interesting, where he was basically about like, obviously he used to be a host at a place, and he was like, despite, you always got to give like, put your best, like your human pride, you always got to put your best first, and his subordinates always looked up to him, but like one person, it was just all too much, and ended up killing himself, so all those subordinates and people he trusted and relied on up and left. So for him, it's like, but he's like, I'm lucky because of that experience. Because of it, I matured, and so. But even like Arisu was almost like, how did you mature from that situation? So that was just kind of an interesting insight, and the way his story played out with him dying, I was like, oh, so we're not really going to get much backstory on him, but we do eventually, and I thought that was kind of neat how that was handled. Like, I had a feeling like it was obviously like a Goonie, but I liked the fact is that, yeah, it's clear it was definitely him, but you get so much backstory on understanding why he did it, because in his own sense, he thought like, hey, I got to save my best friend from himself. Like, he's lost his damn mind to the point, like, obviously, like, he created the third rule of traitors die. He created that after he'd already killed people because, like, these son of a guns are holding their cards for me. That's not how this situation works. Because especially for a Goonie, it's like you're killing people for their cards. You know that you came up with this BS about collecting all 52 cards and you'll be able to set free. It's like you came up with that BS because he wanted a place to give it. Because obviously it was a very hopeless situation of going from one game to another, never knowing that there would actually be an end. He wanted to give that hope to people, but it's like, is that really a good thing? But I can't. It's that complicated thing where it's like you did it because you're trying to do the right thing, but it's like you're doing it more so for yourself because, you know, especially because he made himself out to be like the head honcho. I'm the one leading the charge. I'm so great, aren't I? So amazing, you know. So it tarnishes what seemed like it might have initially been his good intentions, but even then, it's like creating this false, you know, I think it's just a thing of that, you know, he wasn't in the best state of mind because all the psychological trauma from all the games and death, like, it's going to wear on you. So you want it to be like, I'm going to give hope to me and to everyone. Even if it's false hope, it's something, but it's like it kept growing and growing, and I think it got to the point where so many people believed and relied on it in hopes he had to keep it up, and it kind of chipped away at both your soul and your sanity, you know? So I thought that was, you know, interesting how that was handled. And obviously, like, at the time, Aguni and his boys, people are the one, well, him being put in charge and everything, like, forcing all the other executives to kind of, like, get on board. And like I said, some of those people where you're like, I didn't see number two, I didn't see him later on. Maybe he was there, but I don't even remember seeing him dying, so that's why I'm like, maybe that was something that happened off screen, or maybe him not being seen plays a bigger role, you know. But I didn't talk about it, but we did see a little bit of the other different games. Obviously, like, Sagi was a part of, like, this crazy bingo game. There was the one where those dudes had to, like, hold on, and, like, by the time the game came to an end, we saw, like, all three of them fall. There was the one where you basically had to kill wild animals for points. Like, Naragi was, like, sitting on, like, a pirate boat that was swinging back and forth, just killing crows. Aguni, and I think home dude with the tattoos, I think his name was Last Boss. I think, because they said Last Boss at some point. I was like, who the hell is that? Is that tattoo dude's name? But I guess, they were killing tigers and stuff like that. You're like, oh, well, ugh, you know. So it's just showing you some of those twisted games. Because, once again, because I haven't read the manga, I'm curious a lot of the backstories we got in this series, are they a lot more expanded? Were they kind of like condensed in the show, but obviously fleshed out more in the original manga, or were they about the same length? I mean, it might even be a situation where some of that backstories probably didn't exist in the manga, because obviously adaptations change stuff all the time. I mean, it's, you know, especially when it comes to like translating something from like a manga to anime, because obviously I've seen it plenty of times where it's like, oh, there's characters that exist in the manga that don't pop up in the anime, or there's characters in the anime that don't exist in the manga, you know? So I'm curious, like, how many characters potentially are like that, how many backstories are potentially like that. And as you know, that's always something to kind of think about, you know, afterwards, you know, comparing and contrasting, like, you know, adaptations and stuff like that to the source material. But regardless, that final situation, the whole witch hunt, was really interesting, because at first I was like, who would have motive to kill Momoko? Like, that didn't make any sense, because I love that, like, Chichiya had set that whole thing up, screwed over Arisu and everything. I was like, no, because at first it was like, especially like when he was explaining the whole Aguni situation, he was like, the look on his face, it's like, yeah, it was actually blank, that actually the passcode to the safe is the boss tattoo, because obviously, not the tattoo, but the ring, because when you use it for the imprint of the seal, it's 8022, which still ended up being the case, but obviously, like, just he got screwed over, and it's like, oh, you're once again why I compare him to the Cheshire Cat, like how manipulative and because there's he's more foxy than he is. I mean, but to be fair, that's kind of like the Cheshire Cat. The Cheshire Cat was very like, oh, I know a lot more than you think. I'm always talking in riddles type of situation. There's evidence, like elements of that, but he's also very like, because obviously in Japanese culture, like mythology, foxes are treated as like, especially like fox spirits are, foxes are tricksters, so that's why I'm like thinking he's a little foxish if you want to just go by like I think in like compare it to him like in like just a standard. Well, I don't know if that's just like in general how they feel about foxes, or is that more of like a mythology thing about foxes? Whether that I don't know. I'm not well versed in all things Japanese culture, so you'll have to excuse me if and when I do in fact get stuff wrong. So I do apologize. But regardless, like that whole setup situation, and then like as he's about to leave, oh snap, the place became a game area. And I was like, that's interesting. So this place has never been a game area before now, but now it's become one. Even I was like, at first, my immediate thought was like, the game masters did this on purpose, because it's like, oh, you're up here having fun. It's like, no, how about we really shake things up and basically make this place burn itself to the ground? I mean, it kind of worked out that way in the end, but that's why I was kind of feeling like that's why it became a game arena all of a sudden, because it's like, it's been here a while. That's another thing I meant to talk about. I thought was interesting about this too is like, time is different for different people, because like Saori had said that she basically, from when all the people disappeared, it was like a couple days for her. So she had been playing the game for a couple days before the boys got sucked into it, because for them it's like people disappeared like yesterday before we started playing, and all of a sudden like, but you've been playing it while, so like we never actually got that time frame for a lot of people of like how long they've been playing, because they kind of dropped that. But that's an interesting question I'd like to know going forward, like how long have you been playing the game? Oh, I've been playing the game for a couple months. It's like, wait, people disappeared months ago for you? It's like we disappeared literally yesterday, because it's like, because you're wondering, is this because bringing comparison to The World Ends With You, is this kind of like a alternate like a dimension that coexists at the same time? Is that what, like, is this kind of like a different plane of existence? Is it a straight up full blown copy of Tokyo that it exists in somewhere else? Like I mean, obviously that's the mystery to figure out like what this whole thing is about, because obviously later on aliens kind of get thrown out there and you're like, don't be too surprised like what that's up to be. Because this is beyond just what humans are capable of. Freaking lasers coming down from the sky, knowing exactly where you are, because that's the whole thing of like, because even later on, Anne was dissecting someone's brain, being like, where's the damn microchip? Like, how the hell are they able to know exactly where we are at every time? So there has to be some microchip at some point in time. Because Chota had brought up the fact is, like, obviously the fireworks is like, they place some significance in this. Maybe that's supposed to represents something else, but it's like, maybe when those fireworks go off, that's kind of an implication for something else. Maybe it has something specifically to do to the games, that basically fireworks going off, hey, the games are starting. Like, obviously, I'll jump to it for a little bit, but like at the end we see fireworks going off, but that's like the next games have started. So maybe that's what that was supposed to represent, because we still never found out what happened to everybody else. Has everyone else in the world partaken in the games, and they've just been disappearing at different points and different rates, just because time works differently in whatever world they're in compared to the quote-unquote original world? You never know. But that whole witch hunt, circling back to it, was a whole effing debacle. Aguni being like, yeah, let's go around killing everyone that's not part of the militia. I'm like, why the hell would you do that? Like, that's not helping. And like, they're burning people's body because that's the whole point of the game. But I was like, dude, this isn't it's like, obviously once again, this is a 10 heart game, so it's super damn difficult, and it's meant to be a game of betrayal. Obviously, Arisu's disposed of the entire time, but luckily Home Dude, which I love, they had ended up running into him, but Home Dude from the first game, which is interesting because obviously Aguni, not the first game, but the tag game, he was there as well as Aguni, and obviously Chishia as well. So like all of them obviously being part of the beach crew and all that. But that whole that turned into a bloody, nasty massacre. Like, there were so many people that died, so many innocent people too, like people running for their lives. And I'm like, how is this okay? Like, why are so many of you okay with this? Freaking Naragi is. And once again, we got a little peek into his life, and it's like, oh, because you were bullied, you for the first time get to finally feel powerful. So that's what it was about for him. Same thing for Lost Boss. The last boss, I said Lost Boss. He was, it seemed like before he even came to this world, he was already a little screwed up. The like posts he was putting up, but like this world gave him the opportunity to be free to kind of reinvent himself. So that was that was an interesting like backstory to him. The one that really surprised me was Kuina. Like, hers really surprised me. It's like, oh, Hikari. I was like, because she had talked a little bit about her mom's situation. I guess like we never found out what happened to her dad. Like her dad might not have been there to take care of her mom. So it's like he might have already died and she was sick and didn't really have anyone. Obviously, her mom's a lot more accepting of her situation, but her dad was like, her dad was, very much like Hikari when she was Hikari, and he would, because for one, like wanting to put makeup on, it's like, but you're a boy. He was very stern about like, you need to be, the training and everything, and how hard he pushed Hikari was kind of, it seemed like it was, I'm teaching you to be a man type of situation. He didn't put it as many words, but I think that's kind of what they were going for. But that was an interesting development, finding out about her. I was like, oh, so you have that type of backstory. Interesting. Because I'm so curious, like, why you and Tishia, because obviously she's a kind of a bit of a better person than him, because obviously she felt bad about the whole Arasu situation, because she was like, don't you feel bad about it? He's like, I don't know. Like, if you feel so bad about it, why don't you go rescue him? And it's that thing of like, doing that would put me in a line of fire, put me in danger. And it's that, like I said, that need, that self-preservation to look out for yourself. Like, everyone's got it. And I think, someone will probably make the argument there's a little bit of human nature to that, like, that it's in a human's nature and instinct to kind of choose to, save themselves more than others. But obviously there's sides where people, and somebody could probably say, like, it's actually against human nature to help someone. So a lot of people who do that are fighting against their nature just to preserve their own life, and going above and beyond to save someone else. And I think that speaks volumes. And it's an interesting thing. I think, like, I'm sure anyone could fall on either side of that debate or conversation, but I think that's just an interesting conversation in itself versus, what in itself is human nature, and how much is stuff like, natural human instincts, and how much is like, how much of your own nature is you actually fighting against your nature. I don't know. I'm thinking too much about it. But, because the entire time I'm trying to guess, I'm like, who is the witch? Who's the witch? There was a part of me, I won't lie to you, that was like, is Momika? I didn't think like, oh, Momika killed herself. I'm like, Momika, did she fake her death? I was like, how would you fake your death? And literally went over and pulled the knife out of you, because it turns out she was in forensics in the overall. So I was like, oh, that's interesting and handy in this situation, because she's trying to reveal the fingerprints. Kuina having her fight with Last Boss, and I liked her taking, like, kind of like, she's like, whereas you want to run from your past, she says that she's going to embrace her past. So she took, like, the training she learned from her dad when she was younger, because we don't know if she continued it, after she was kicked out of her home. But she takes that and applies it and kicks Last Boss's ass. There's so many moving pieces to this whole thing. But like I said, I was trying to understand, like, obviously, like, and even then there were people who worked for Aguni, they were kind of like, man, we've literally gone so far, we've killed so many people, like, if we go back now, there's no point. It's like, doing all this isn't leading them to the witch, but there's chaos, and it's just you could tell definitely it was all part of the game. But luckily, Usagi was able to rescue Arasu, and it's like, all right, in the room with Asahai and home dude from the tag game, and he's trying to figure this out, because he's like, I'm in the mind of the witch, but it's like, no, I shouldn't be thinking like the witch, I should be thinking like the game master about why this was all started. It's like Momika and then Hatter's murder. It's like they were waiting for Hatter's death. Why? And then kind of, he ends up figuring it out and obviously confronts Aguni, being like, first saying like, oh, like if you try to stop me instead of working with me, that must mean you're the witch. But he's like, you're not the witch. You're beating yourself up because you killed your friend. And obviously he beats the shit out of Arisu because of that. And it's like Arisu understands. He's like, I've literally been, and that's the sad thing is he didn't kill his friends, but regardless, you could say whatever you want to him. He will always see it as, I killed my friends. My friends didn't they sacrificed their lives so that I can live, but it doesn't change the fact that I still killed them. By me living, they died. And that was so interesting too, because they set that up in episode 2 when the taggers ended up dying. They set that up of like that, and then they like pay that off in folds in the next episode by making it his friends dying because of him surviving. So I thought that was such an interesting element to it. But it's like, for him to be like the real witch behind all this is Momika, and it's like she killed herself, and it's like that was an interesting twist where you're like, because he was saying like we could have literally gone through this without killing anyone, and it's like that doesn't make any sense. How? Because Momika killed herself, and we had just burned her body from the beginning, like none of this would have happened. But we were so quick to turn on each other. I mean, he's like, because he understands it like no one else had. Because the way they kind of imply it is like he's the only one that's ever gone through a heart game and survived. Like no one else has ever come out the other side. That's why, like, I think Hatter had taken an interest in him too, was because of that too. It's like, because one of the cards they were missing was the 10 of hearts. And so it's like, you, with your experience, what can you tell us? And it's like, because I think because of that, his experience with games, but also him having gone through that experience and lost what he lost, it gave him a different perspective on it allowed him to get into the mindset of the game master in this particular case, because he had gone through that, something no one else, at the beach had. Aguni was just looking for death. Because basically he wanted to punish everyone else. He was so frustrated by like having done what he did, but it's like I only did what I did because my friend had lost his mind. Why did my friend lose his mind? All of you are the reason why. Because there were so many of you, he kept going deeper and deeper into that false belief of like collecting all the cards and we'll be safe. Like obviously he's like, that's BS that you created, but he started sipping on the Kool-Aid himself because he wasn't in his right mind just because of everything. So Aguni ended up killing him out of self-defense because he was like, because for Aguni, it's like, for him, all he ever needed was the fact is of his closest friends near him, and their trust in him was all he needed. That, like what hope is in this world, all he needed was like his friends nearby. Like, for example, Hatter, having Hatter by his side, a good friend of his from the OG, the original world, having Hatter by his side, but now like obviously like so much of that got lost and twisted in this world, and that's kind of the whole point. But Hatter had an unloaded gun. He wanted to be stopped because he realized how far he had gone, and he wanted Aguni to be the one to stop him. It's like, I need to be stopped. I've kind of gone too far off the deep end, I think. I mean, he didn't have a bullet in the chamber nor the clip. And so that's kind of the mess upness of it. So it's like, is this on Aguni? Is this on everyone else? At the end of the day, it is on the game master for concocting this whole thing. But obviously, Arisu was able to get through to him by being like, all these people around you are still alive. Don't look down upon them. It's like, yes, I get it. You're mad at yourself for having to kill your friend. You want to blame everyone. You're frustrated. He's like, but it's not right to take your frustration out on all these innocent people. All these innocent people you're potentially about to kill. All these innocent people you have killed just because you're frustrated at yourself and the circumstances. They're not the ones who did this. You did, and you went too far with this. And then the whole Asahi situation, her admitting she was a dealer and immediately dying, and it's like, wait, so does it mean she was a game actor? It's like, no, they were just, and then especially because I think in the same episode we had gotten those videos from Momika and Asahi about that whole circumstance, of like, yeah, we've been here a couple of days, we met someone, they offered us a job, and you're like, oh, so you guys met with the game master, you work for the game master. I was like, that's fascinating. But all that ended up getting resolved. Obviously, Naragi popping up again. It was like, oh shit, you're still alive. But your boy Aguri making a sacrifice and, try to make up for all that he did. I think trying to make his death mean something. He took Naragi out. Obviously, the last boss, for him, he's like, oh, I'm thankful of this world and stuff like that. So it's like, you go off and do your whole, be over there and be crazy, bro. I mean, you've been crazy since, like, the beginning. This world just gave him an opportunity to be free, to be the freest version of himself that he's always wanted to be. It's a whole thing. That's why, once again, I'm wondering, like, there's probably, I mean, you're also thinking about, like, a manga, too. Like, there's probably a lot, because you could almost see this, like, a lot of their backstories as being kind of, like, 0.5 chapters or, like, one-off chapters. Kind of just being like, all right, while you're in the middle of stuff, you dedicate an entire chapter of a manga to, like, a person's backstory. Like I said, we got a tiny bit about Naragi. Like, I don't know whether that, like I said, I get the feeling that's, a lot of that's probably expanded upon a lot more in the manga. I just assume, just because of my personal experience having read manga in the past, I just assume structurally they would do that, probably dedicate an entire chapter to certain people's backstories. I could be wrong. Like, maybe people's backstories were never tackled at all. Maybe what we saw in the show is as much as you got in the manga too. Once again, I've never read it, so I don't have the compare and contrast. And then even at the end, Usagi wanting to go after all the militant people, but it's like, Arisu stops her because it's like, we're alive at the end of the day. That's all that matters. Because one of them tried to kill himself, but he couldn't. They've run out of ammo. And it's like, this paradise that was built is burnt to the ground, and it's like, their paradise is gone now. Like, all that was built up. So many people dead for nothing, too. So that was the real, really interesting aspect to that. Then we had Chishiya and Kuina at the end getting, like, the card. And it's like, well, got most of the cards now except for the face cards. Because the face cards are the only cards they don't have. And I thought it was so interesting where it's like, and it's like, oh, I wonder what management was trying to show us. So I was like, wait, are you guys the same thing? Are you dealers as well? Maybe, probably not. I mean, that's the sad thing. You don't know. And once again, that's just the beautiful thing about how the story was structured, because they started this, they introduced this concept that there are other players out there who are kind of forced to play different games of their own, like the taggers in episode 2. Like, to see that kind of brought back with Asahi and Momoko, because we saw them in the background, like, because at one point Arisu was kind of like, oh, hey, I just want to talk. And they ran away from him because they were probably having arguments about, like, they're trying to avoid people because I think there were some of the people that were staring Arisu down the moment he got there. Like, it's like, but Usagi was like, oh, it's probably just because them looking at newcomers and stuff like that. But maybe it had something to do. I don't remember if Asahi and Momoko were two of those people. I think they were, but I could be mistaken. But, we finally get the full backstory. We find out, like, oh, this is a literal, like, televised event. Like, people are it seems like people are, like, the game masters, or who they believe to be the game masters. Like, obviously we saw through Momoko and Asahi's videos, we kind of understand that they're actually preppers. That, for one, they're the ones that set up the games. Because that's also the thing, too, like, because that was the whole point, like, whoever set up the game, it's like, it had to be someone on the inside who would be able to mess with the power of the place. Like, the only person that would know and have access. That's where at first it's kind of like it has to be like one of the militants or whatever. But that was just interesting to know that they're not the only ones. There are other people. There are plenty of other dealers out there. And that's the thing. You don't know who's a dealer and who's not. Because everyone, is, it's a game within a game within a game. You're on some Inception level type of shit. And I love it. But they help construct the games, and their part to play was they even said it, like, sometimes we play taggers, sometimes we play other players in the game to kind of throw other players off, or also just to just to screw with the game and make it more interesting. But the game masters we saw were betting and celebrating, like, oh my god, and then, like, they were like, because at first I was like, is this being televised? Is it supposed to be kind of like a I was wondering if this was supposed to be kind of like, and this is a weird reference to pull from, but I thought it was kind of like a I'm blanking on seriously. Oh, Hunger Games. Oh, Jesus, I couldn't get at that. The Hunger Games, like how, like, that was kind of, I mean, it's a weird reference to pull because I've never seen any of the Hunger Games. I've never read the books either. But that was televised, right? So I was wondering if it was something like that, but it's like, no, it's for their own personal amusement. But I thought they were televising it. And so when Usagi and when Usagi and Arisu ended up tracking them down, it turns out they're all dead, and I'm like, they're not the game masters, they're other players as well. That was the roles that they were meant to play, and I was like, that's interesting. Because at first I was about to say, these are the game masters, these are the people behind orchestrating everything. Obviously they were enjoying themselves, but obviously it was like the role they were meant to play. But also maybe it's also because a little bit of, made them feel better too, because it's like, hey, we don't have to be the ones doing this. Our game is us putting them through these games. Or maybe part of it was they needed to enjoy it. But we also understand the whole, like I said, Asahai situation where it's like why she died. It's like their thing was that they're supposed to never reveal that they're dealers, and because of that, like that's why she ended up dying. But then like Chishiya and Kuina are there as well, so it's like. And it's like, and once again, bringing things full circle, he found that paper in like episode 3, because they were still at the tag place in episode 3, I think. So he might have gotten episode 2, episode 3 from one of the taggers. He couldn't figure it out, but then he realized like, oh, it was like the subway system of like the underground railroad systems of like Tokyo. And so that's how they found that room. But that's why I'm still kind of like, are you guys actually dealers? I don't know. That statement about management made me wonder. Could be mistaken. But then we find out, like, Mira, and, like, she's there. Because I was about to say, it was like, we haven't seen her. Granted, she seemed kind of weird, and I was like, maybe she's just a weird oddball. But we ain't seen her in a hot minute. Oh, lo and behold, she's one of the game masters. But even then, it's like, she said we, so she's not in this alone. So that's why I was like, it's the dude that was number 2. Is he a part of that as well? Like who? I mean, granted, probably other characters we haven't met yet. Because obviously, it's like you don't. I think it was Kuina that said like it was either her or Usagi that was kind of like, oh, I'd rather have seen an alien than seeing like Mira's face, because it makes it just seem like it's another human. But for Arisu, it's like. It gives us a target now. Like we now have the face of it, because now Mira's like, oh my god, the game that you guys collected all these other cards, so it gave us an idea. Let's start the next round of games. This time it's going to be for face cards. So we've entered stage 2, maybe, because we don't know if this might be like stage 2 of the games. Like who knows, like if there was something before stage 1. What we've seen might be stage 1, but because of the time frame and stuff like that, you'd assume it's all part 1, but who knows. The fact is that Chishiya is also collecting the cards makes me think he's not management, but you never know. Like, everyone's got their roles of playing this, so it might be he playing into the role that he's got. Like, it just seemed like they know more than what's going on. You don't know. There's still a lot of blank spots in a lot of people's stories, but this sets up some interesting things. Obviously, it's like, oh, we got the new game. You have, like, balloon, blimps. With the card showing, and I'm like, oh, is that supposed to be how the new games are represented? It's like, are they showing people like, hey, come here if you want the cards, or is it supposed to be like just a sign of like, these are the cards you're fighting for now, face cards? Maybe not. I'm also like, I doubt we're done with all the characters we met, but at the end of the day, it's only these 4 characters. It's like, what about the people who survived? What's its face? The beach. And I'm like, most likely a lot of those characters we probably won't see again. They're just kind of, I mean, maybe Arisu and the crew will eventually cross paths with them during the next phase of the game, potentially, because I feel like they introduce a character like Anne with her forensics. I mean, now it'd be really interesting. You were like, yeah, and all those characters you followed except for these 4 gone. Like I said, home dude from the bus situation, like I said, that was like episode 4, I believe. Him. Like, he's still out there, potentially. So there's still a lot of room for crossing paths with people. But it's like, I'm curious. And once again, you also have that complicated thing of, like, you also have to be wary of anyone else you cross paths with. Because can you really say that they're really players, or are they actual dealers? And they can't ever admit to being dealers, because if they admit to being dealers, they're as good as dead anyway, So, once again, it's still figuring out this mystery about how all of this is possible. Is this another dimension? Is this a copy of Tokyo that they were taken to? Is this aliens? Or are these humans with super... Like, what is this whole thing that's going on? It has a little bit of Lost to it. Another series it kind of heavily reminded me of, too, is Cage of Eden. Just that... Also, the nature of, like, kind of any character can get it, like, at any point in time, kind of definitely reminds me of Cage of Eden. If you've never read Cage of Eden, I read the manga, like, years ago. I never finished the series so I need to find a way to collect all of that and read it because it's been years since I read it. But it's basically like it's basically like Lost, but instead of most of the cast being adults, they're like 18. They're seniors in high school, 18, 19-year-olds, and so. And it's a lot darker and bloodier than Lost. Some of the deaths in that are rough. But that's what when I think of Cage of Eden, I think of this series, this being one of those depressing series. Like I say, you're just like, I don't want to read anymore. I don't want to watch anymore because I know that some people I like and care about are going to end up dead. Like, this seems like one of those series that's like, oh, this is going to have a depressing ending. It could have a hopeful ending, but it's just because so much depressing shit happens throughout the story, you're like, there's no way this is going to have a happy ending, right? It's going to have some twisted, fucked up ending. I get that gut feeling. Once again, I've never read anything about this series, so I have no idea, you know, like I said, I've never even read the manga, so it's like I'm pulling that from nothing, you know, so that's just the feeling I get. But like I said, this was like a hell of a ride. Like I just kept being like, I gotta see where this takes us. Like I ran through all 8 episodes because like it's so I'm a sucker for a good mystery, and this is a major ass mystery that I don't think. I mean, it might be the thing of I don't think it's going to be that thing where it's going to be as simple as you think it is, or maybe it will be. But I think things are going to be so big and complex that I don't think anyone's ever going to nail down, unless you've probably read the manga. Then you're like, oh no, it's easily, you know, or maybe someone has already figured it out. Maybe people before the manga was even finished, because I think the manga is done. I think it actually finished a little while back. Not more than a little while back. I think it was like a couple years ago. Like, regardless, I'm going to tangents and stuff like that. But regardless, that's not really important, but it's just like figuring out the mysteries, what other games, you know, because the games are going to be different. Because it's also interesting too, because the games aren't necessarily the same either. Because obviously, like, they're structured the same because of obviously, like I said, the clubs, the diamonds, and the hearts. Those represent 3 different games. But now that we're dealing with the face cards will probably represent different games too. Like, you know, so that also begs what's also going to be interesting, though, is, like, because there are a limited number of face cards and stuff like that, like, how's the difficulty going to range for that and stuff like that? What else are they going to play? You know, that's definitely going to be interesting to see how that whole situation plays. And, you know, when it comes to collecting all the cards, like, when it's all said and done, when you have all 52, is there going to be something special that comes about that? Probably not going to be, returning to the original world or not. It's probably most likely going to be something probably messed up and twisted. You know, maybe there's going to be some... Because obviously this next stage of the game is their prize for getting as far as they've done, played all the games they played. Oh, look at all the people. Think about all the comrades you lost. Even throwing... the Karube situation, like, obviously that being one of the things getting thrown in... Arisu's face, but still, I'm interested to see where things go from here. At the time of me recording this, nothing's come out whether or not Alice in Borderland is coming back for a second season. To be fair, it's literally Thursday at the time of me recording this, so the show literally just dropped today, so I'm not too surprised. I hope it does come back for a second season, because I'd love to see, once again, this being my first instance of this story, because I've never read the manga once again, so I'd love to see where they take a second season. Once again, what do the games look like? You know, more reveals about who's the mastermind and/or masterminds, because even Mira and them might, and whoever else is on that same level as her, might just be other players as well. So, like, who's the grand mastermind behind everything? Maybe it's one person, maybe it's a group of people. I'm definitely curious to see how this plays out. Some other stuff I was quickly reading, because, like, obviously some people have a feeling like, oh, if there is a second season, there's only going to be like 4 characters. Like, the 4 characters we see at the end are probably the only characters we'll get to see. So that's another thing too. Like, are these going to be the only characters, and we get a whole slew of new characters? So every other character we met before, they kind of all doing their own thing. Will, you know, Asuru and them. Arisu and them cross paths with them later on. We're going to get more backstory in a lot of characters, because Shishia, we know nothing about him. We didn't get anything about his backstory except for him being, like I said, like the very Cheshire Cat type character that he is, but also, like I said, just a sly fox as well, you know, so... I'm curious, you know, like I said, I hope this show comes back for a second season, because I love to see what they do with a second season. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good